Want to advertise your business in a cost-effective way? It's time to give podcast advertising a try. Research shows a high rate of podcast listeners made a purchase as a result of an ad they heard on a podcast. Visit podbean.com/brands to launch a cost-effective podcast advertising campaign in minutes. That's podbean.com/brands.
Hello and welcome to episode 77 of the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast. I'm Dan Jennings, and 10 years ago I gave up my life's dream and career as a radio presenter with one big regret: never getting to interview my hero, the legendary British musician Paul Weller. This podcast exists purely to solve that issue. Welcome to Desperately Seeking Paul. And in this episode, I'm joined by Tom Doyle, acclaimed music journalist, author, and long-standing contributor to music magazines like Mojo and Q. Over the years, he's been responsible for some of our favourite interviews with Paul Weller and profiles with the likes of Paul McCartney, Elton John, Yoko Ono, Keith Richards, U2, Madonna, Kate Bush, R.E.M, and many, many more. As part of White Label, he has collaborated with Paul on various special songs and extra releases over the past 6 years. So let's dig into loads of lovely Paul Weller connections and his own work as well. Tom Doyle, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, really, really good to be on here, Dan.
Oh, bless you. It's not a bad lineup that you're joining, to be fair. The guests we've had on so far has been pretty good, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, hopefully getting closer to the end goal is the aim. Fingers crossed, right? Bloody hell. Who'd have thought I'd have to do so much work just to get to that end point? Now, look, there's so much for us to cover, not least your life as a journalist and everybody that you've interviewed and everybody that you've covered in your work in the music press and stuff. So Christ knows how we're going to fit this into the time slot that we have, as well as all the Weller connections and all that as well. But let's kick off with when it was that you first discovered the music of Mr. Paul Weller. Was it solo? Was it the Jam? Was it the Style Council?
It was the Jam, actually. I grew up in Dundee in Scotland, and I was a punk rock nutter, right, when I was a kid. I'd sort of been a complete Beatles head up until about the age of 10, 11. And so 77, I was 10, 78, obviously 11. And the first time, I was thinking about this today, there's a few sort of scattered memories of the Jam. One of them is me and a couple of my mates at a birthday party when we were at primary school, actually, jumping around mental, right, to This Is the Modern World, the album. So that's a really strong memory. Also, I remember, I don't know if you remember, but Peter Cook, the comedian, had a sort of music show called Revolver on TV, right? And it was like a late night thing. And I remember seeing the Jam on there too, and David Watts. So it must have been 78. And then I do remember buying Down in the Tube Station at Midnight, which was the only Jam single that I ever bought, because then my brother Brian, who's 2 years younger than me, he just became a Jam, Style Council, Paul Weller super fan. He really is. I think he's been to see Weller over 30 times, maybe 40 times or something like that. But anyway, I didn't have to buy any of the records after that because he bought them.
I thought you were going to say, at that point, I decided I couldn't like them because he liked them.
There must have been that, yeah. No, but I love the Jam. I remember sitting listening to the radio when Going Underground went into number one. Loads of memories of the Jam. I never saw the Jam, but I do remember, and I have talked to Paul about this, the effect that the Jam splitting had just when I was at secondary school, and there was like one kid crying on the bus and stuff like that to school. It was a big thing, and obviously Paul remembers the Beatles splitting up and the effect it had on him. And obviously it's hard for him to get his head around this, but it did have that effect on my generation, actually. So, that was, so these records were there all the time as I was growing up. My brother bought everything. And I don't think I actually I didn't see Paul perform until the Style Council. Right, and this is quite a good story, actually, because by this point I was working on a teenage magazine in Dundee, and Polydor, I had said to the PR at Polydor, I said, listen, they're playing Glasgow Apollo. And as it turned out, it was the very last night of Glasgow Apollo. I think it was Bulldoze like 2 years later or whatever. And I said, look, is there any chance, I could have 4 tickets rather than just 2? And she said, yeah, I'm sure that'll be fine. And then she got back to me, and I can't even remember her name or whatever, so I'm not putting anybody in trouble or whatever. But she said, listen, do you want all the tickets I've got? And I think it was about 12 or 14 tickets, right? So suddenly, there's a whole squad of us, right, all went through to Glasgow to see them. And I mean, there was people there. There was people in this squad that didn't even know who they were and all this sort of stuff, Obviously, we were totally hammered by the time that we got there and when they came on. So I can't really remember much about it. I do remember, I've sort of got a visual snapshot in my head of them on stage, but I can't remember anything about the Apollo. And I do remember a stone's throw away. That's the one thing that I remember from that gig. And that's the only thing that I remember. I can't remember getting there. Can't remember getting back.
Were you not meant to write an article for the magazine?
Nah, it was just a bit of a jolly. Here's the tickets. I mean, I think she was just being lazy and thinking, look, their stock, as Paul accepts, was pretty low. I mean, mind you, not in 1985. No idea why, right? But I do remember that, I think she just thought I could get rid of all these tickets and I won her. And so, it was a good jolly. So I'm told,
Amazing. Yeah, you're right. She can then just reject every other request that comes in, having done her job, got rid of them all, done, sorted.
Yes.
So that love of writing come from a very young age then? Did you know from the outset that that's what you wanted to do when you started thinking about a career then?
I remember talking to a school's career dude in secondary school, and I said to him, I either want to be a drummer or a writer. And he said, nah, both of those are too hard. And so I've kind of become both of them in a way, kinda, So, I mean, I was a music obsessive, music press obsessive as well. Every Thursday, I mean, I could only buy one, so it was usually Sounds because it was punk and heavy metal, which I loved at the time as well. Being 13, come on. So, I mean, being in Dundee, I was in loads of bands from about the age of 13. I was just in loads of bands. I mean, I think by the time I was about 14, 15, I was drumming in about 5 bands. So that's really what I wanted to do, was I wanted to be a drummer. But obviously I was a music press obsessive, and I was one of these sort of annoying guys who anything that they wrote in English class would end up in the school magazine and all that sort of stuff. So I kind of knew that I could do that as well. And then there's a publishing house in Dundee called DC Thompson, and really, being honest with you, I completely fucked up my last year at school, bunked off in the park, stoned it and up, So my options were narrowing quickly, put it that way. And this publishing house did like teen mags like Jackie, Patches, Blue Jeans and stuff like that. And so I saw an ad in the paper, or I think my dad did, and he said, you should go for this. And so I did, and I got the job, and I started. I mean, there was a week in between me leaving school and starting this job. I mean, that was it. And within 3 or 4 months of being in there, I was interviewing bands at 17, and then at 18 I started coming down to London and interviewing people. So I did that for 4 years. I was 18 and interviewing like Talking Heads and The Cure and just amazing, mind-blowing things. But the actual job itself was drudgery, it has to be said. So I did the same as I'd done at school, for the last 2 or 3 years in there. I was stoned at my head in the fucking place. And so it was all, my options were narrowing there again, I found, Then I really wanted to move to London, really for the music. Also looking back on it, I mean, I suppose being, at that time I was living in a council estate in my teen years on the outskirts of Dundee, like a really rough place. And so it was about as far away from the centre of the London music scene as you can imagine. And I just really wanted to get in the middle of it all, is the truth of it. And so I ended up with a job at Smash Hits in 1988, and I worked there in the office for 2 years. And then as soon as I could go freelance, I did. And I had another band in London. It was always parallel things, basically, So I'm just basically being a chancer and seeing how far I could get, is the truth of it.
I love it. Your options got so narrow, you ended up at Q, is basically what you're saying, right?
Exactly. Yeah. For 30 years.
Yeah. And man alive, I think I've said this on the podcast before, I still miss that. I miss the fact that doesn't come through my letterbox every month. That was such a powerful music publication, Q magazine, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, it was so sad to see it go last year. I mean, and particularly, I mean, it had rough periods, Q, where its direction, well, it was kind of directionless at certain points, but I mean, by the end, it was really bang on point again. And Ted and the team there were doing a brilliant job, actually. And the enthusiasm for music and writing and stuff like really shone through. But I suppose it's tough times. I mean, we know it's tough times for print press and stuff like that. And really, I suppose Q was the last mainstream music magazine. And now, I mean, the two magazines that I write for most are Mojo and Sound on Sound. And those are both really, if you think about it, specialist magazines. So I think it's a time really for specialists magazines, and obviously both those magazines are doing a great job. But yeah, super sad to see Q go. I mean, we were kind of expecting it for a few years, and every time we used to go to the Q Awards, we'd always go, oh, this will be the last one, oh, this will be the last one. And then obviously one year it was the last one, and that's one of the things that I miss as well. I mean, I miss Q popping through my letterbox as well, because I mean, I'm a reader, I'm a fan, it's like I'm a Mojo reader as well as a Mojo writer, and the fact that Q doesn't pop through the letterbox is sad. But then the guys have moved on to do the new Q, the newsletter, which anybody listening should definitely check out and subscribe, because it's really good. It carries on the spirit of particularly the front section of the magazine, and it's great for recommending stuff. And there's a Spotify playlist, every week and stuff like that, so you can actually listen to what they're writing about.
I didn't know about this. I'm going to have to dig into this. I didn't know anything about
the new Q, CUE. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Oh, cool. Okay. And I'm guessing it was through Q Magazine that you first come across Paul Weller. So, writing for magazines of which, Paul's coming back as well with the solo career. I'm guessing you're still a fan at that point?
Massively, actually. Yeah. I mean, I did buy it into Tomorrow. Actually, the Paul Weller Movement 12-inch. I heard it on Gary Crowley. He played it on GLR. I remember just thinking it was brilliant, because it sounded really modernist, with that groove and stuff, and it was loop-based and stuff. And it was just, the sentiment and stuff like that. I mean, I loved it. But I never interviewed Paul until 1999 for a section in Q called Cash for Questions.
Oh, yeah, I would have read it. I remember. That's when people had to send in their questions to Paul and you got a $5 or something. Was that right?
25 quid, mate.
Was it?
$5. Come on, it was 25 quid.
Oh, yeah. No wonder it went bust.
Well, between me and you and the doorpost, we can now reveal that probably half of them were made up by the staff, because it was a perfect opportunity, right? Basically, obviously, if you turn up and you're doing an interview and you ask a difficult question, that's you asking a difficult question. But if you turn up and you go, well, no, it's Peter Brooks from Ealing here,
Yeah.
Just made up.
Ask anything you want, yeah.
Absolutely, and it really literally was. It was perfect for doing difficult people, because it really was don't shoot the messenger. So I did some amazing Cash for Questions. I mean, I did one with Keith Richards, I did Lou Reed, I did Brian Ferry, I did John Lydon, and it was great to sort of brazen this out. It's like, look, mate, I mean, I didn't even pick these questions. I didn't even pick these questions. So you could ask really full-on things. Anyway, so I did one with Paul in 99, and it was funny, man. I mean, he's, straight away funny dude, And also, I remember him sort of lighting a fag at the beginning and going, let's fucking get it done then, which was completely, he was talking my language. I just wanted to get it done and get out there as well, actually, being honest with you. But it was very funny and quite illuminating. I mean, I've not read it for years, but I do remember him saying stuff. I mean, somebody asked the inevitable jam question, and he was quite short about it, which was interesting. I said, as a follow-up, do you not even hang out, never see them or whatever? And he was like, nah, we weren't even mates back in the day, mate, that sort of thing, Which is weird, because, I mean, obviously him and Bruce have, worked together and everything since then. But I suppose at that time, maybe late 90s, I mean, would you really want to get asked that question? And he's never going to do it, so why do you even bother?
As he still gets asked that now, another, 20 plus years later?
Well, it's just everybody's wasting their time. He's never going to do it. Forget it.
Yeah, of course not. Absolutely. Let's talk about music as well from you. So you mentioned this kind of these parallels. The room you're in looks like some kind of studio as well. So we've got a massive piano. We've got a drum kit in the background there as well. So this is where you make your own magic. Yeah, I'm guessing.
Well, mud. Yeah, make my own mud. This is probably with me and Ant Brown, who the pair of us have been working together for about 30 years, actually, as various different things. But I mean, obviously as white label these days. Yeah, we've had various studios, all called Scabby Road, right? So we had Scabby Road 1, which really was Scabby. Scabby Road 2, slightly less Scabby. And I suppose this is Scabby Road 3, which is just basically the loft in my house.
Right.
But yeah, this is where it's all done, because I mean, these days you don't really need a studio. I mean, even you used to use it for things like recording drums, but I've got an electronic drum kit here which can trigger, basically sounds that were recorded in Abbey Road or sounds that were recorded in American studios or whatever. So, the versatility is unbelievable, really. Yeah. So this is where it all happens or doesn't.
And now talk to me about the connection with Paul around music. So there's your journalism and your career there and interviewing him. But at some point, obviously, the link happens between you working together and collaborating together. So I'm aware of Stolen Voices, which was this project in 2011, which I don't even know how you managed to do this. Is this a legal thing or not? I'm not sure. Should we talk about this? I don't know. But this is basically where you get these these vocals rather from people like Bowie and Lennon and the Supremes and create remix and full arrangements with these vocals. How did that come about? And how did you manage to get away with it?
Don't know how we got away with it, but it's a bootleg remix album, isn't it? Because people weren't particularly interested in us being a duo with me singing. So the idea was, let's do what we're doing, but have David Bowie singing or Neil Young. It's one of those things in music, you sort of give up for a wee while and then an idea sparks you back into action. And so that's really what it was. It was kind of, let's do this for fun. And then we did put it out to radio and stuff like that, but we made sure, obviously, that we never made any money out of it. And we did press up some vinyl and stuff like that. But then it started getting bigger. There was more attention and stuff. And there was basically what happened was Lauren Laverne was sort of championing it on Six Music. And they would sort of giggle and go, I don't know if we're allowed to play this stuff. And the truth is, no. But then it was the other thing about it that we were always careful about. It wasn't like we were taking like Lady Madonna or whatever. It was always, even if it was famous artists, we always made sure that it was either songs or tracks that had never been officially released. So we're actually doing a bootleg remix album of bootlegs, so like Child of Nature by John Lennon from the Esher Beatles sessions. At that point, that hadn't been released, the Bowie track that we did, Tired of My Life, which was from 1970, and it's just a home demo, basically, and it's still never been released, still to this day. So we've done that, but the connection with Paul was actually pretty funny, right? Because I think so. I said 99, I'm trying to work at the dates here, 99, then some years later, it could have even been 10 years later, I'm at the Mojo Awards, and the awards are in progress, and I nipped out for a smoke, and in the smoking yard was just me and him, and I thought we were sort of opposite ends of the smoking yard, and I thought I better say something because otherwise it's a bit weird, because I did interview him, he might remember, but usually people don't remember whatever, So I just went, all right, Paul, I'm Tom, interviewed you for Q, and he went, oh yeah, he says, you're that geezer that gave me the vinyl, and I said, oh yeah, and I was thinking, what does he mean? I never gave him any vinyl. I was thinking, what? And then he started going, yeah, you still at it then? And I was going, yeah, well, and I think I can't remember. Yeah, at that time, I think we were just starting Stolen Voices or something like that, right? Anyway, it was a couple of days later when I realised, I was like, shit, I did give him vinyl. And me and Ant at that point in 2000, right, around about the time that I'd interviewed him, had done an album on Grand Royal, the Beastie Boys label. And we were called Electric Music, AKA, which is a shite name. But that's what our name was at that time. And the album was called North London Spiritualist Church, which is a mouthful, but it was a good album title, I thought. And it was a good cover and stuff like that, because the cover was a spiritualist church that was actually around the corner from our studio, so it all tied in and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I had given them this vinyl. And it is one of the things that maybe some of your other guests will say about Paul is that he has got like a mind like steel trap. And so obviously I didn't see him again for quite a few years. And then I went to do a Mojo piece with him in the 100 Club. Right, and we were doing the photo session in there with Tom Sheehan, the legend that is Tom Sheehan, the photographer. And as soon as I got in there, he was like, Paul's like, yeah, you're right, man. And I was like, do you know what? I said, see, last time I saw you and you said I'd given you vinyl, I was thinking, what the fuck's he on about, And then I realised he's going, yeah, all goes in there. All goes in there. And then he said, again, so are you still at it? And it was like, yeah, I'm actually. I said, we've just done this thing, Stolen Voices. So I had to go and see him again, maybe about a week or two later or whatever, down in Portsmouth. So I took him down, and then the next morning he texted me and he was like, this is great. He said, do you fancy doing a remix? So that's how the connection happened. And obviously it was like, yeah, man, you know what, an actual legitimate remix, you know, that we don't have to pretend is legal. And we'd been doing legitimate remixes at that point as well. I mean, that's one of the strange things, is that the Hannah Peel and Erlen Cooper, they were in a band called the Magnetic North, and we'd already done a remix for them and various other people. And so these things all ended up on our second white label album, which is called Borrowed Voices. So you see what we're doing there. You see there's like a thread here. But
it's almost like there's a plan. There's a
well, are you kidding?
And Paul Weller's on that as well, isn't he? Paul Weller's on that as well. So let's go through these. So Saturn's Pattern came out in the May, and then I think it was around December time we got this EP, Saturn's Peak, which was a new track crossing over, and then remixes of things like Pick It Up and Saturn's Pattern and Phoenix, which we'll come back to in a sec. But there was this version of Going My Way from White Label, this remix, and you'd kind of isolated quite a lot of the vocals. It sounded, dare I say it, almost more beautiful, I think, than the original. I actually ended up listening to that more often because it sounded like I don't know, it just, how did you approach that as a remix?
Well, you know what, actually, when he said, do you want to do a remix? I said, well, why don't you send us the stems for 2 tracks? Just thinking we might fuck one of them up, or it might not be very good. There is always that thing, it might not be very good. So he sent us Going My Way, and I can't even remember if I'd requested Phoenix. I can't even remember how it worked. But anyway, we ended up with the stems for both those. So really, when we do a remix, we'd generally just request a cappella lead and back vocals. Sometimes if there's certain elements that you think, you listen to the track and you think, you know, I mean, we might incorporate this or that, maybe strings or brass or whatever. But I think with Going My Way, when the stems came through, there were some parts where Paul had been playing piano as he did the vocal. They were on the same track, basically, you know, so it's the Beatles-style-y thing, you know. I mean, we were used to sort of filtering out things, right, to try and isolate vocals when we were doing the bootleg remixes. But with this, because the piano part was so nice and stuff, I thought, well, no, we'll work with these parts that I've got the piano on them in one way, and then the acapellas and the backing vocals and blah, 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 we'll work with them in another way. And I think with that track, I mean, I think with a remix for us, we always try and think about what's the direction, rather than just sort of blindly run into it and try slamming down slap bass and jazz fusion drums and going, actually, this is crap. So with that one, I remember thinking it would be brilliant if it was a sort of late 60s, kind of zombies-ish kind of fantasia, basically, you know? And so it was really good fun. I mean, obviously it's brilliant, like setting Working Ways vocals and stuff like that. And I mean, there was loads of really great wee bits. I mean, there was a bit at the end, I seem to remember, where you could hear him on the original sort of counting down, you know, like a Space Oddity thing. I was like, why is that at the end? Let's get it at the beginning, you know, so that he's counting into the first change and stuff like that, you know. So, I mean, that one, yeah, I mean, it really worked, actually. I think, I mean, I hadn't listened to it for ages, and then I listened to it this morning, obviously, because I knew I was going to be talking about it. And yeah, it worked really well, that one, actually, didn't it? Yeah, there's lots of little sections.
Yeah, really nice.
Yeah,
really
nice. I sort of forgot half of the stuff that was in there.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I've revisited the EP very much, apart from that track since then, I'll be honest with you. But so that track really stands out. It's lovely.
Well, I couldn't possibly comment.
Yeah, I'm probably trying to get the other people on as guests, so I really shouldn't say that, should I? But yeah. So you got Phoenix at the same time, because that turns up on your Borrowed Voices remix LP, doesn't it? There's a track called Paul, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. I mean, with the Stolen Voices and Borrowed Voices things, just, you know, obviously it was about anonymity and stuff like that as well for us, but also a kind of guessing game for the listener, you know. So with the Stolen Voices thing, it was just every track is just the first name of the singer, right? So, I mean, on the first one, it's like, you know, there's Gene 1 and Gene 2, and then there's David 1 and 2, I think, is there on that one? No, John 1 and 2, that's right. So, Phoenix would just become Paul under that sort of structure, right? But yeah, I mean, we did both those tracks at the same time. We did Go My Way and Phoenix at the same time. I think, just talking about that direction thing again, I mean, Phoenix is almost like a house track, I think, you know what I mean? It's like really up-tempo and stuff like that. I mean, it's really full on. And so, I mean, we are sort of the down-tempo stoner kids, you know, or no kids, but I definitely thought this could be like a great sort of real hazy, summery, almost Isley Brothers type vibe, you know. And I mean, at that time when we were doing the remixes, there was 3 of us. There was me and our longtime pal Steve Ongle, who is another guy from Dundee who lives in Berlin, who's an amazing keyboard player, and he's just amazing. And he wanted to concentrate on the remixes. So, and as time went on, actually, he didn't want to get into writing with people, But at this point, what I would do would be I would just put a really, really simple beat on something. This happened with Going My Way as well. This is how Bolson worked. Really simple beat on it, sort of give him a slight direction or whatever, but give him no chords whatsoever, right, on the track. So because he's just great and actually a proper musician, right, he can sit there and reinterpret the chord structure or imagine a chord structure. I mean, Paul actually did say at one point, he says they're not like remixes, they're like reimaginations or reimaginings, which is definitely what it was, and that's how that worked really, because Steve he'd never hear the original track until the end, and it was always, and neither actually, and it was always really good fun to work on this thing you'd be working on it for weeks, months sometimes, and then go, and here's the original.
What was the reaction from Paul when you shared those back to him?
Yeah, he loved them, actually. Yeah, he did. Yeah, he loved them. I mean, it was amazing, isn't it? I mean, really. It's one of those things. I mean, you can't think too deeply about these things because you get too self-conscious, Yeah, he did love them. He loved them, actually. Yeah, he called me up and he was buzzing about them, actually. Yeah, he was completely buzzing about them. And so he said, I only want to use one of them. And I said, yeah. Or I think it wasn't even I would only want to use one of them. It's like, we'll only use one of them. And I said, so can we have the other one for our record? And he was like, yep, cool. So that's how that worked, basically. Yeah.
Brilliant. And am I right in thinking around this time for Q Magazine, you got to go to New York with the guy as well?
That's right. Yeah, that was a bit after those remixes, actually. Yeah, because that was around about the time we were doing Moving On, actually. Now, I don't like to suggest, right, that I was there on a jolly and I was not there for work or money. Yeah, it was a live review. You don't get paid a lot for a live review, even if it was a big live review. It was like a 4-pager or whatever. Yeah, it was just a jolly, really. I just wanted to go out there. And when he was playing 2 gigs at Irving Plaza, which is quite a small place, actually. I mean, I think it's probably a couple of thousand, maybe even less. Yeah, it just sounded like it'd be a laugh. And it was a top laugh, actually. Yeah. So it was really good. Yeah.
This was pre-True Meanings, right? So this was this Kind Revolution tour? Would that be right?
Yeah, it would be. Yeah. And we'd done a remix for Kind Revolution as well.
Hopper.
Yeah, right. There's a story about that, actually, which is pretty funny, right? So Paul had sent us a text and said, I've finished the new record. Do you want to come down to the barn and check it out? Come down with Jans, right? So we went down and he said, yeah, I wouldn't mind you doing another remix of this one. He said, choose, have a listen, see which one you think, And you know what playbacks are like. I mean, it's like huge speakers, blaring, etc. And being slightly discombobulated at the end of it, I said, well, look, you gave us 2 last time, I said, we'll do them on spec. I said, why don't you do the same? And I'd said to him, I can't even remember which numbers. I'd said something like, give us 2, 4, 6, something like that, because I didn't know any of the titles or whatever. Right? So when the track came through, it was the wrong one. Right, it wasn't one of the ones that I'd picked, right? And actually, maybe it was one of the ones that I'd picked, and I'd got the numbers wrong because I think on that album is Hopper 6, maybe, and I'm pretty sure, yeah, because this is
number 6, so I remember.
Yeah, go. So I'd got it wrong. Right, I'd got it wrong, and he got it right. Mind like a steel trap, right? So he'd obviously gone 2, 4, 6, right? So when it came through, I was like, shit, because it wasn't one of the ones. I'd sort of been thinking about the other ones and thinking, yet again, which direction can we go in? So when I got the a cappella through, it was like, because it's a lovely track, Hopper, but it's kind of, where'd you go with a remix, We'd had this idea for a while of doing, basically, right, we'd been up to see Grace Jones up at Ali Pali, me and Ant, and we said, she's that groove, she uses that in quite a few tunes, we should nick that groove, actually, So it was the idea was to do a sort of Sly and Robbie, because it's like Private Life or Walking in the Rain and stuff like that, So what I did was immediately put this a cappella, Paul's into the program and put a beat up and a bass line and sped up the vocal just to see if it would work. And I mean, this took 20 minutes, because it was a shit. Because I'll always feel a wee bit lost if there's not a direction, and that's one of the things about making music. If you know where you're going, it's pretty easy, and you've just got, that's where the perspiration comes in. It's the inspiration, man, that you need. So, but that one, actually, I did listen to it again this morning. That one turned out really good as well, actually. Yeah. And it was that sort of Sly and Robbie Compass Point thing, which, me and Ant have revisited again again, actually. You were just really big fans of that sort of era and Sly and Robbie and stuff, you know. So yeah, we'd done that, even though it was the wrong trousers.
You're up against. I wonder who got first dibs then. Were you first in the room, maybe? Because we got Villagers, we've got the band Toy, we've got. I mean, Stan's done a few remixes. Sid Arthur, Erland and the Carnival, the Woozy Mama, which is the track that I was talking about with Hannah Peels on strings on that with Erland Cooper. I wonder what the pecking order was.
Who knows? Yeah, bound to be us first, isn't it? I mean,
obviously, yeah. Now, you mentioned moving on. So this is 2018, True Meanings, the album that comes out, which is, I mean, you get a proper co-write, co-produced by a white label track on there, Moving On, which, where is it? It's here. This is such a beautiful LP, isn't it? I mean, even just the artwork, the cover of this
amazing,
thing.
Yeah.
It's an incredible album. How did that come about? How did you get to actually, be working and collaborating on a song that goes on the main LP?
It was after the Hopper remix, and he sent me a text saying, do you fancy doing a co-write on the next record? I was like, yep. Obviously, total buzz. And so, I mean, it was kind of interesting, actually, because we sort of worked similarly to how we'd done the remixes, but obviously not working from stems or an existing track that had been done for a record. He would just, I mean, a lot of the ways that he works is, I mean, he tends to write late at night a lot of the time, or it is in my experience anyway. I think, the life of a touring musician who's somebody who's been doing it 40 odd years or whatever, I mean, they do tend to switch on later, don't they? So I would get a lot of texts late night with voice memos, but just really rough ideas and stuff like that. So we batted a few of them forward and back. There was probably about 2 or 3 that we were sort of working on. I was thinking, this could be good. This could be, I mean, Moving On started because he had that sort of riff, the opening riff that goes through the verse and stuff like that. And as soon as me and Anth heard it, we were like, yes, we know what we're doing with this, right? Because most of what we do is kind of, we've got a few strains, and so psychedelic soul or that late 60s sort of trippy vibe. But another thing that we're really big fans of Jimmy Webb and, that late 60s, early 70s sort of style of, I mean, you can take an Elvis and all that sort of stuff as well, with the sort of really haunting strings and just that lonesome vibe, I mean, there was just a really brilliant strain of songwriting going on in California at that time. And so straight away, even from these 2 chords, we could hear it. It was like, you're right, this is it. This is the way to go with this one. So yeah, we built it up. That went forward and back. I think it's hard to remember, but it did go forward and back. And then what happened was we got it to a certain point as an instrumental. And then when I went to New York on that trip, I mean, I was just off the plane, went to the dressing room or whatever. And then, he started blasting it out, on the Bluetooth setup in the dressing room and stuff, which was pretty surreal, it has to be said, actually. I mean, especially when you just get off a flight and stuff, it's all pretty weird anyway, Steve Craddock's coming up and going, what's that sounding? It was really cool. I mean, the band and everybody that works with Paul, they're all ace, and they make you feel really welcome. But yeah, it was quite a weird moment, actually. And then the next day we were at, that Stephen Colbert, I think, is it the Late Show or whatever? Really big show there. So the band were doing it and stuff like that. And it's pretty funny, because it's just, the smoking ban is everywhere, isn't it? But certain musicians, they just didn't give a fuck, right? So, I mean, I could smell like he was smoking in his room, in his dressing room. So I stuck my head around the door. I was like, oh, come in here for a smoke. And then he pulled out of his bag the lyrics to Moving On, actually. So I don't know if he'd written them before or overnight or, no idea. And, and he sort of said, have a look at these, see what you think, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, it was ace. And obviously you can tell that there's a sort of universal aspect to that song as well as a personal aspect to it. And then, when we got back, I mean, that Moving On was all done remotely, actually. And then he put the vocal on, he put some guitar and piano and stuff like that on. And it was pretty easy, that one, actually.
In recent weeks on the podcast, people have talked about this kind of brush strokes of Paul and almost like a painter layering things up. And that's definitely one of those songs where when you look at the cast list on that song, there's so many different layers being added on. It's incredible. And you can hear that through. It's such a lush arrangement and such a lush, beautiful song, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, Hannah's amazing, right? Because, I mean, obviously this happened with Moving On, and it happened with Glad Times as well. I mean, string sounds, that you can use at home and stuff like that are good these days. I mean, they're pretty good, right? So we would put string parts on things, particularly on those two tracks, we put string parts on things. And then basically what she does, what she did with both the tracks, listens to them, decides which bit she likes, which bit she doesn't like, or whatever. And usually she's picking up on sort of melodic motifs or whatever in both those tracks. That's definitely what happened. And then she basically just poshes them up and makes them sound ace and, conducts them. And, what she does is incredible, really. So, that track turned out really good. And I think one of the things, what I've learned from working with him, I suppose it's, we can get a wee bit nitpicky, and I'm not saying that he's not, but it's all about forward motion. That's for sure. He's not one of these artists who will sit there, not to say that he's never done this, right? But he's not one of these artists who will sit there getting massively frustrated by, something not sounding right or whatever. Because, there are a lot of procrastinators out there in the world of music, aren't there? And one of the things that, I've definitely learned from him is it's all about the vibe. Get it. If you know where you're going with something, just push forward fast. You know what I mean? Get the vibe down and Bob's your auntie.
It's incredible, that album, because there are so many co-writers on it. And yet it sounds like, to me, like his most personal album yet in terms of the catalogue, which is remarkable. But and Moving On definitely stands out of that. It really is an incredible thing. So since then we've had True Meanings, we've had The Other Aspects live album and gigs, which was brilliant. We had On Sunset last summer, which was a real treat and a proper sunshine album. And then this year, what a surprise, Fat Pop comes around. We get, this hit rate and this kind of this productivity from the man's incredible, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, the thing is, it's his job, man. It's just,
that is true. That is true.
It's his job, It's like I did actually interview Damon Albarn last year and said something similar. It was nothing to do with Paul, and I said, "Oh, you're not slowing down, are you, Damon?" And he went, "Why would I slow down?" He says, "You don't turn into a bricklayer and say, oh, you're not slowing down building those walls, are you?" It's just like, you're a bricky man. You get up in the morning and you lay bricks, Yeah. So, I think there is that thing that it's his job. He's got his own studio. I'm not saying it's workmanlike in any sense because, obviously it has to be inspired. You
definitely feel that work ethic though, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, that's the thing. You'll be down there 5 days a week. So, and if you're thinking about it in that way, then to make an album a year, then doesn't it seem really that incredible, does it? Because it's just what you do. And then you go out on tour and you play them, man, so.
Yeah, I remember listening to, so the album came out, when was it, July? And I remember Tim's Twitter listening party. I don't know if you follow these things. So, which has just been a lockdown saviour, hasn't it? Been absolutely fabulous. But,
I've seen quite a few of them, yeah.
So good. And there was a quote from Paul talking about Fat Pop, which was the listening party. And he said about Glad Times, and he said, basically, and I'll read it for you. He said, they sent me the backing track probably 2 years ago, so it's taken me this long to finish it properly. They're a very talented team, and I'm hoping we'll do more music together. So Glad Times was the first song, if I remember rightly, was it the first song we heard from Fat Pop? Certainly it was the one on Later with Jules Holland that we saw, wasn't it? And
that's right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And so how did that come about then? So you created something, a sample or a tune that you sent to him? How did it work?
We're always writing tracks, and sometimes there'll be one where you go, you know what, I think Weller would like this one. And that was the case with that. And sent it over. And do you know what? I think it was quite long, the track. And it was quite meandering, actually, because it's the same chords basically all the way through, pretty much. And so it kind of ebbed and flowed, this track, and he started putting ideas down on it, and they were sounding brilliant, man. But then I suppose the structure of it wasn't clear. So I think that's one of the reasons why it didn't end up on Sunset. It would have fitted on that album as well, I think, actually, it went forward and back and forward and back and forward and back. And then finally he said, look, I think we need to finish this together. So that was one that we actually, everything else had been done remotely. For that one, we did 2 days, all of us together down at the barn. And that was really interesting in a way because obviously they've got their team, right, with Stan, Paul and Charles. And so a couple of interlopers coming in. You're not quite sure how this is going to kind of work. But it worked immediately, actually, has to be said. And even Charles said that at the end of the night. He was like, I wasn't sure how this was going to work, but it worked great, didn't it? So, and that's exciting because, put it this way, we'd played enough on that. by that point, right? So it was a case of just going down there and chucking ideas at things, you know, and vibing him up, basically, you know, because I mean, Stan has said that as well, that one of the things that's great about Paul is like he just wants to play, you know, so you'll be going from, let's try this idea, let's try that idea, you know, so he's moving for the piano to the guitar, you know what I mean, the synth, and then obviously because of the wonders of modern technology, you can chop arrangements around. So there was a lot of that, you know, how's this tune going to work, you know? So we did 2 days with that, and that was basically, I mean, I think it was done.
At what time did you hear the words? When was it that the lyrics kind of come into this?
The lyrics were sort of forming by, I would say, the second version that he sent to me. But by the time we were down in the barn, the lyrics were done.
So when you get these lyrics about, you know, I'm going to read some, so I just don't know what's happening here at all. We go for days without a words, without a kiss, both looking for something that we miss. When you get these lyrics, is there any part of you wants to go, where's this come from? What's this about for? Is this about the missus or what? You know?
Well, if I was interviewing him for Mojo, I'd probably ask, but if I'm in the studio, there's no fucking way I'm going to ask, you know? I mean, well, it was pretty clear that it was personal and stuff like that. So if somebody's expressing something personal in a lyric, you know, I'd be digging them in the ribs going, oh, what's this about then, mate?
Yeah,
it's really personal. One of the things that's funny, actually, is that I suppose through, you kind of, when I'm interviewing people, I often forget that they are who they are. It's quite a strange thing, actually. And so, not to name drop or whatever, but, you know, I remember there was one time I was interviewing Paul McCartney, right? And then he suddenly said, well, you know, when we made Sgt. Pepper, no. And honestly, I just thought, fucking hell, right enough, you're fucking Paul McCartney, aren't you? You're in the Beatles, aren't you? Because you forget. You absolutely forget. And it was similar when we went into the studio, because you're just having a crack. I mean, we obviously have worked with loads of different people down the years, singers and different musicians and all this sort of stuff. And so you'd absolutely forget, right, that it's Paul Weller. And then this was the funny thing, right? I remember him going, right, he was like, Charles, I'll try a vocal. And he went in and started singing. I was like, that's fucking Paul Weller. Everybody noticed this. That's fucking Paul Weller, man, you know? So that was one of the surreal, you know, and then that door closes again after, you know,
back to
30 seconds or something like that.
Brilliant. I love it. It's also interesting that you say, like, you know, bits of it were worked on before around on Sunset time as well, because in a way there's references that you feel are linked to what we've gone through with COVID and lockdown, the glad times around the corner as well. But I don't know, the double meaning almost, isn't it?
I mean, I think that was just prescient, you know. I think it really was, because, and I did actually text them actually at one point and say something like that. So I was just like, you know, this kind of chimes during this time, because particularly, you know, the bits in the bridge and stuff like that. I mean, we all got to do that. I've all got to hold our heads up, you know.
Yeah.
Eyes on the horizon and all that sort of stuff. You know?
Exactly.
But it's odd when songs do that, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And it feels like Paul seems to do that a lot. It's weird, like the sixth sense. It's all going on in the head, like you said. We ought to also mention Paul Lefty Wright. Tell me about Paul Lefty Wright.
Lefty. Paul Lefty Wright. Lefty is an amazing musician from Dundee. He's an amazing musician from Dundee who is, I mean, he's a sitar player. He plays guitar like Jimi Hendrix as well. I mean, he's kind of amazing, and he's a total head as well. I mean, any conversation with Lefty can zip it out around the universe and stuff like that. I mean, he's brilliant, right? And we sent him the track that would become Glad Times. Obviously, didn't tell him who it was for, right? Because he plays on various bits and bobs for us and stuff like that. And he put down on that track, I mean, originally he played flute, he played sitar on it as well, and he played this instrument called an esraj, which was new to me and new to Paul actually as well. It was like, I had to Google it, man, you know? So it's like a tiny wee Indian cello almost, you know, it's like a bowed thing. And so that was the bit that survived, you know, because I mean, the thing is, like, loads of stuff went on that track and then was stripped back and stuff, like much more than Moving On. I mean, there was nothing really was stripped back, but I mean, with Glad Times, there was fucking layers and layers and layers of stuff, you know? And then at that point, it was step away. I mean, that's Stan and Paul's and Charles's job, really, you know? So it's a shame, actually, you know, because there was a couple of nice wee flute bits on it or whatever, you know? We should maybe do the Lefty remix at one point, right? You know, instrumental remix, just sitar and flute and the esraj, you know? But yeah, I mean, anybody wanting to check out Lefty's music, Paul Lefty Wright, I'm sure there's stuff up on Spotify and stuff. And also just going back vinyl off him, right? Because he's made a couple of amazing records and stuff. And it's a trip. And we'll definitely be doing a lot more stuff with Lefty because he's ace.
Brilliant. Love it. Love it. Love it. You almost feel, in a way, that the last few albums, we could already be at deluxe box set stage where we could have the other versions out, by the sounds of things, there are other mixes and things that they just constantly changing and stripping things back, adding more layers.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Give it 10 years, you know what I mean? I'm sure.
Yeah. Wow. Something to look forward to. We should also mention your next release from 2021, Other Voices. So the Voices theme continues. Other Voices EP1 with the late, great Bim Sherman on one track as well. His stuff I discovered through On You Sound, which I'm a big fan of as well, that record label, which is fabulous. So tell me about how that came about and the story behind that release.
Well, I mean, Other Voices, the idea with this was that we were going to do 3 EPs, right, and then put them together as an album coming out next year. So the first one, Other Voices 1, came out this summer. Being honest with you, we're now probably going to change the plan, just bloody put the album out. Because I thought to myself, right, if I had bought 3 EPs from somebody and then they asked me to buy the album as well with all the same tracks on it, I might feel conned. So anyway, that was the first 4 that were finished. I mean, the Bim track came about, obviously Bim died in 2000, and it all sort of ties back to that Electric Music album that I mentioned, the one that I'd given Paul the vinyl and forgotten about, right? Because that track, the Bim vocal, is actually on that album. And we're always meant to do something else with it. Basically, a track that focused just on Bim's vocal. And we didn't, we couldn't find it on the master tapes. We couldn't find it on any of the discs and stuff like that, his soloed vocals. So we sort of given up on the idea. And then last year, Ant discovered a bit of software where you can put any mixed track in there and isolate the vocal, right? It can just process that, right? So there's a few versions of this out there now, but I mean, it would have really helped us for stolen voices and stuff. So we managed to get the Bim vocal isolated, and it's just such a beautiful melody. He's just ace, The reason it had come about was because Ant did work. Ant was an engineer at On You Sound in the 90s.
Oh, wow.
So
cool.
This is how, so that's how he got to know Bim, and then that's how we got to know Bim. And Bim used to drop into our studio, Scabby Road 2, quite a lot, actually. And so we got him to do this vocal. So it was really nice to actually do something that sort of honoured that vocal rather than just using it as a bit part. And the other interesting thing about that track as well is there's these female vocals in that sound like the Supremes. Right? And this is an amazing program that just came out last year where you can actually type in lyrics for these backing vocalists. Now, it's wildly hit and miss. I mean, wildly hit and miss. But the track's called Do You Believe? And as soon as I typed in Do You Believe and sort of messed around with the phonetics and stuff like that, I could sort of get it sounding as if it was like the Supremes singing Do You Believe, right, with Bim. So it's almost like the ghost of Bim Sherman, right, and orchestrating the ghosts of the Supremes or something like that, even though some of them, of course, are still with us. But I mean, that was an amazing track to do, actually. And I suppose, is it indicative of all the stuff that we're doing? I mean, that one's sort of really dreamy soul track, actually. And then the track that we did with Jill Lorien, which is the opening track, Sleepwalking, is more, yet again, back to that Compass Point sort of dub style thing. So yeah, I mean, we're working at the moment on finishing it all up, and I think we're going to chat about it. We might put another EP out before then, or we might just put out the whole album as Other Voices, So, but yeah, it sounded cracking, actually. Yeah, quite exciting. Really nice.
Really, I mean, I love his vocal and anything, but it was a real treat to find that and hear that. It was lovely. And what's next for you guys with Paul? He mentioned the fact that he'd like to do more music with you guys together. Have you talked about that? Do you know what's coming up?
Well, I mean, if I knew, I wouldn't have tell you. Put it that way. Of course not.
But I have to ask, right?
Yeah, obviously. Yeah, totally. Yeah. This is the are the Jam getting back together question, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, he's dead. Well, I mean, he's keen, and we're dead keen, So, yeah, I mean, he said some really lovely things about the 2 tracks that we've done together and stuff like that. And they've both turned out great, actually, and I mean, it's surprising to us and stuff like that. But it's brilliant, because, I mean, we'd kind of been operating in obscurity for a long time, and Paul sort of plucking us out has kind of validated what we've done and given us, you know, a whole new turbo boost and stuff, you know. Yeah, I mean, for sure, we're dead keen to do more stuff, and he seems to be keen as well. So let's just see where it goes. I mean, I think he's got a lot of touring to do, isn't he? You know,
you definitely get the feel from talking to people on the podcast who are working with him or have worked with him that once he finds people he likes collaborating with, people like Erlen Cooper, Hannah Peel, the Stone Foundation, and gets on with, because that's obviously a really important part as well. It's like you're all having a laugh, you're enjoying each other's company too, that you want to continue that, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And it feels really natural. And that's the thing. I mean, sometimes you can be banging your head against the wall trying to get stuff going. You know, I mean, every musician or writer or anybody like knows that sort of state. When you're not doing that and when you can feel that it's just all flowing and stuff like that, it's daft really not to capitalize on that, you know, in whatever way you can, because there's plenty of times when it goes away. And, you know, I think Paul said that to Noel Gallagher once, didn't he? You know, if it goes away, don't chase it. And I think I mean, Paul obviously knows he's on a real creative role at the moment. I wouldn't imagine that he would want to stop that or whatever. But I mean, he's gagging to get back on the road, I'm sure. I mean, he's got to be. I mean, that's a long time off the road for somebody who's, you know, spent all their life touring, and also for the fans and stuff like that as well. I mean, it's just, I mean, I've been to see 2 gigs in the last 3 weeks or whatever, and it was quite a strange experience, really. And I sort of forgot how much I'd missed it in a way. And that's for somebody with a lot of gigs in the tank as well. You know, I didn't miss it, actually, being honest with you, for about the first year, because I'd been to so many gigs down the years. But yeah, I mean, I think that's got to be his priority at the moment, isn't it? Is getting back on the road, and he loves it, doesn't he? You know, Scottish crowds are Ponto.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about Barrowlands and what an experience that is, which sounds epic.
Yeah. It's many experiences, Barrowlands. I got it into one evening.
Tom, this has been such a delight. Thank you so much for joining me, my friend. I got 2 final questions for you. You're allowed one Paul Weller song for the rest of your life. It can be the Jam, the Style Council, or solo. Which one are you going to go with? I'm
going to go back to Into Tomorrow. I think if I had one Weller track that I could only keep one, it would be that, just because it's such a driving tune. It reminds me of a great time. It's obviously, you can hear the rebirth for him in that track as well. I mean, it's what it's all about. It always sounds killer live. As soon as he starts playing that riff live, you know what I mean? And your head's going, you know? So if I could keep one, it would be that for sure.
Love it. And obviously the point of this podcast is to, I mean, yes, it's to talk to lovely people like yourself, but it's to get that interview with Paul Weller that I never managed during my radio career. If it happens, please God that it's going to happen at some point. What should I ask him? What should I talk to him about?
You should probably say, why the fuck did I have to start a podcast to get this interview with you? Right? So that should be your first question. Follow-up question should be, and what am I going to do now, Paul? What am I going to do now?
That's a great question. You know, what series?
What are you going to do? Yeah, I mean, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to can the whole podcast then if you get the interview.
I've not got any more ideas, my friend. It's back to your creativity point, right? You got suddenly the pressure's on. What comes next?
I'm sure you'll get it, and I'm sure you'll think of another idea as well.
Oh,
you know?
Fingers crossed. Tom, this has been so nice. Thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it.
Brilliant. Cheers, Dan. It's been ace. Thank you.
Well, there you go. My thanks once again to Tom Doyle. Loved every second of that. If you've enjoyed this episode of the podcast, then please do share on your social media channels. Help us to spread the word. You can get in touch on Twitter @WellerFanPod or on Instagram and Facebook, Paul Weller Fan Podcast. You can also head to my website to find more information on Tom. I've put up loads of links to the music and articles that we talked about. You can also buy our exclusive pin badges, and if you'd like to buy me a virtual coffee, that would be lovely as well. Just go to paulwellerfanpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.